Welcome to the This Week in Cleantech podcast. Each week we speak to a leading CEO, executive, thought leader or insider in the cleantech sector. Each guest shares their thoughts on recent events, their own cleantech story and their vision and hopes for the future. This week our host David Hunt is talking with Jan Michael Hess. Jan is founder of Ecosummit and Ecosummit Ventures. Ecosummit Ventures will be an independent smart green VC in Berlin that invests in European software and hardware startups. Ecosummit is Europe's leading conference for smart green startups, investors and corporates. That's enough from me. Let's hand it over to David with Jan Michael Hess.
Okay, good morning, Jan. Thanks very much for joining us on the This Week in Cleantech podcast. I take it you're in Berlin at the moment?
Good morning, David. I'm in Berlin. That's correct.
Nice and sunny, hopefully.
Yeah, it was pretty sunny yesterday, a little bit cloudy, but tomorrow is going to be 16 degrees. And I'm pretty sure climate change is partly or mainly responsible for it because it's really warm in Berlin at this point of time in the year.
For sure, yeah, and that leads us on to the reason we're all doing what we're doing. So again, we'll talk around Ecosummit. This year, of course, is the celebration 10 years of Ecosummit, which is great. I'm looking forward to that. But before you set up Ecosummit, clearly you were involved in other sectors and in sort of the sort of a clean tech and startup environment. Can you just give us a very brief background of your time prior to starting Ecosummit?
Yeah, so basically I have a business background. I studied at the University of Mannheim. I also spent a year in Barcelona, and already back in the year 1996, I started getting excited and becoming active in the internet. So basically, I'm a digital pioneer. I called together a few fellow students at the university, and we started an internet agency in the year 96. And I actually believe it still exists. And then a little while ago, after finishing my studies, I joined an internet agency here in Berlin called Pixel Park at the time. And then I moved to Hamburg, joining a Swedish internet agency called Icon Media Lab at the time, and being basically a strategy consultant and project manager for them. And then in the late 1990s, in 99, I joined a startup company in Munich, in the south of Germany, another important city in Germany. And basically in the year 2000, I came to the conclusion that it's time to get started in the mobile internet space, which at the time was pretty early, because you may remember that the iPhone was only launched in the year 2007.
Sure.
But at the time, the Japanese were really far advanced, thanks to iMode and the mobile internet initiative of NTT Docomo, the largest mobile network operator in Japan. And because I was and I'm still a big fan of Japan, I traveled many times to Japan. I took international managers to the Japanese market and even to South Korea. I worked on a couple of startup ideas in the mobile internet space and did some consulting for mobile network operators. And then fast forwarding to the year 2009, I basically started thinking about the planet and the future of mankind. After having worked so much in the internet space and mobile internet space, I came to the conclusion, boy, I think these problems are mainly solved. Yeah, of course, we can do a little bit more optimization here and a little bit more digitalization there, and then artificial intelligence is the new gig in town. But I really came to the conclusion, let's sit back and rethink the way we are actually working and living and producing on this planet. So the idea of sustainability and resource efficiency hit me.
Yeah.
And then in 2010, a little while later, because I basically made the decision I want to go into clean tech. I was very interested in the startup community and the investor community, but basically I didn't know anybody in the clean tech space. And I thought it would be a good idea to start a conference, an international conference in Berlin, bringing together the stakeholders, bringing together startups, giving them a stage and a platform to get promoted, to become famous, and to meet the right people, especially investors and corporates and other key people in the industry, like service providers like yourself.
Cool, cool. I mean, at the time, Berlin is very well known, of course, for having a very vibrant clean tech and startup community now. What was the landscape like when you started 10 years ago?
Let's say it was a wild ride, because we only had 3 months available to pull off the event, to organize it. And we made a mistake right from the beginning. We did it on a Monday, and without knowing really that the VCs have a GP meeting every Monday. So those partners in a VC firm come together every Monday to talk about deal flow, to talk about current investment opportunities, to meet the most important startups in the deal flow pipeline, for pitch sessions in front of all partners. We didn't know that at the time, and at the first event, not so many VCs showed up. Moreover, if you start a new event, there are some pioneer participants, because they like to check out any new thing, any new event. But then the others really watch it first, and then find out later who attended it and how much did they really miss, and then they maybe come to the conclusion, okay, next time I should be part of it. So I think in the year 2000, it was very different from today, 10 years ago. But of course, there was a first wave of startups, especially in the solar industry. And there have even been, I think a little bit later, the first solar IPOs in the German market. And there are actually some of these people who made some money back then, they are still active as angel investors, even now, even still today.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that's really, I won't say unique, because perhaps other people have followed and copied to some extent, but the Ecosummit audience of a great combination of startups, VCs, but also a lot of institutional investors and corporate investors as well. Was that always the strategy, to have that breadth of audience?
So I think in the beginning we were really broadly focused on Cleantech and the many sectors. And I think somebody like the Cleantech group, they probably count 15 sectors within the term on the paradigm of Cleantech. And I think over time we really narrowed it down, because we came to the conclusion any successful event needs to have a critical mass in one big vertical. And the Berlin event, above all, developed into being a really trendy event and a really useful platform in the energy industry. At the same time, we learned that the energy industry is really at the core of the cleantech revolution. So it kind of made sense to focus this event a lot on energy. And as you know, the energy industry has a lot of connection and interconnection with other industries, especially with the mobility. If you think about the beautiful combination of renewable energy and electric mobility, you really know what we are talking about. Or if you think about the electric home, where in the future we are heating our homes with the help of heat pumps that are powered by electricity rather than burning fossil fuels. So I think the underlying concept of electrification is really going into all kinds of nearby industries.
Sure. Yeah, and I see that sort of evolution, and as you say, I guess going back to your early digital start, it comes full circle a little bit now, as both mobility and energy are becoming increasingly sort of digitalized. Now, going back to the sort of the audience, it must have been very difficult, because I started in clean tech in solar back in 2007, and it was hard not to be taken seriously in many markets. It was difficult sometimes even to have supplies. In the UK, we had to link up and get our supplies directly from Germany. Again, how have you seen the investor market change over time to be now perhaps much more receptive to startups and to taking some risks for, I should say, companies with an ethical purpose, as well as a sort of a product or an IP?
Yeah, I think actually there are a couple of big trends that we have been observing. Yeah, and I think one trend is if you look at financial VCs, these are the VCs who have many LPs, many fund investors, and they're really driven by financial returns. And I think in the past, maybe around that time frame, maybe even earlier when you got started, maybe 2005 to 2010, and then a little bit further on, Cleantech was in fashion, and a lot of new financial VCs, or let's say a fair number, yeah, maybe 5 or 10 financial VCs have been created in Europe back then, and only a few survived, and a few others basically went out of business because they supported too many, too risky, too long-term, too capital-intensive business models and technologies. Yeah. I think nowadays, after so many years, the current generation investors, including some of the gray hair guys who started 15 years ago, and they have already raised a third fund, maybe, they changed their investment strategy. They adapted it to market trends, yeah, and really also adapted it to their own lessons learned, meaning that capital intensive business models are something to be to be cautious with, yeah,
Sure.
meaning that people now look a lot more for revenues. They want to see product market fit. They want to see some traction, and they want to ideally already see revenues, which means financing a pre-revenue startup, especially in the area what many people nowadays call deep tech, yeah, where you assume, okay, some complex combination of hardware and software is going to be developed, and they probably need many years to even enter the market. These are the things that are very tough to finance. And these are the things that, of course, we still probably most likely need them. Yeah, and that is, for example, why some rich guys like Bill Gates created a fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, where they especially want to support the long bets, yeah, the super risky stuff that the other investors don't touch easily nowadays.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. I guess the other interesting thing I've seen, and you would have seen more closely, is how the institutional investors, and particularly a lot of the traditional utility and oil and gas companies, have become very active in the market. Of course, making a lot of acquisitions in the last 1 or 2 years. But even before that, they seem to have funds and seem to learn how to better fit with the clean tech or with the startup environment, and not to sort of acquire and squash and suffocate companies, but to give them legs to still be a startup. Have you seen that, or have you, or do you still see that it's a little bit clunky when a big company acquires or invests into a startup?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the relationship between startups and corporates is the object of many researchers and practitioners in the market, meaning that this is a lifelong thing that can be studied, that can be practiced, and that can be optimized. Yeah, I think for the corporates in the energy space, but also in the mobility space, and basically in every vertical, the business opportunity of corporate venturing in the context of open innovation, and also leading up to M&A opportunities, is something that they are all active in now. Yeah, I think everybody that wants to survive as a big company needs badly a lot of innovation, and you can either develop it internally or you look for it externally in the marketplace. And if you look for it externally, people call it open innovation. And one tool inside or within the open innovation tool set is definitely corporate venturing, yeah, where the big corporates start making minority investments in companies that they think are important for their future. Yeah. And that's what people call a strategic fit, or really good strategic reason why a corporate is getting interested in a startup. Yeah. And the success of Ecosummit is also powered partly by an increasing number of corporates who are getting into corporate venturing. Some of them have done it before in the past and then they stopped it, but now they're doing it again. And I think it's really high time. It's really en vogue, among all corporates to start corporate venturing. A lot of new jobs are being created because these corporate venturing units usually need some experienced people that are being recruited from the outside in order to do the job for the corporate.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that ourselves in the last couple of years that, I should say, firstly, they're putting aside funds to make the acquisitions or the investments, I should say. But equally, looking for people who have a keener eye and a clearer understanding of what tech may or may not be more, lesser risk and more appetizing from an investment point of view. Certainly in the last couple of years at Ecosummit, it's been interesting to hear some of the stories from the corporate investors that are exhibiting. Again, if you could perhaps share with us a little bit of the upcoming event in terms of the format. Very busy couple of days, of course, but an opportunity to share some of the companies who may be there and the format for the 2-day event.
Yeah, and so Ecosummit is something which is really close to my heart. I work very hard every year to create unforgettable and really productive events. And some people like it very much because we have a lot of relaxed investors. Yeah, and if an investor is relaxed, you can chat them up, you can pitch to them, and they will listen to you, and they have an open ear. Yeah, so Ecosummit is really a fast-paced pitch event where we have, I think in the end, it will be around 80 startups doing 5-minute pitches. And then next to the 80 startups going on stage pitching, we have a lot of presentations from sponsors, including corporate VCs, a few financial VCs, a few service providers, a few corporates who decidedly are not investing, but are still very interested in open innovation and M&A. Yeah, so basically, they want to do business with the startups. They want to acquire startups, but they just do not do minority investments. For example, Enel, in the Italian utility, is one of the guys who explicitly is not active as a CVC, as a corporate VC. Yeah. So the Ecosummit this year, as you mentioned in your introduction, is going to be our 10-year anniversary and actually our 20th event. It's a 2-day event on the 15th and 16th of May, and it has one stage, which is also important for Ecosummit because everybody is sharing the same stage, even if it is a small startup with 1 million revenues or a big corporate with more than 50 million revenues. They all go on the same stage, yeah. And this is something that really creates an equalized atmosphere. Everybody is on the same stage and standing in the same networking area next to each other, and they can all speak to each other freely without being nervous, without having any second thoughts, but just in order to meet new people, to make new connections, and to drive their own business forward.
Sure. I think the networking is something that stands out. We're not trying to make this too much of an advert, but I really enjoy the Ecosummit for that same reason. There's great coffee. There's a great atmosphere. There's quite a relaxed opportunity to speak to people perhaps you wouldn't otherwise meet. It's interesting also, again, at Hyperion, my company, we've worked with a number of startups and clean tech companies that have been through the doors, so to speak, of Ecosummit. Are you able to share perhaps some of the success stories from companies who've exhibited and pitched over the years that have gone on to great things?
Yeah, and it's actually what we call the Ecosummit track record, because it so happens that Ecosummit as a team and as a conference, we managed to discover startups and to bring them onto the stage when they were quite young. And then they have gone, they have grown up and they have managed to acquire and basically to raise many financing rounds, and some of them even got acquired. Yeah, and the latest example and most likely the most important exit actually in Europe in the last couple of years was the acquisition of Sonnen by Shell, yeah, the Dutch oil and gas company. And as many people in the industry know, Shell is investing a lot in creating a new energy business unit because they know the oil and gas business is basically not the right way into the future. Yeah, it has some people call it sunk assets or stranded assets. I think sunk costs and stranded assets, and they really want to invest in renewable energy, energy storage, and new digital energy services. And that is actually the reason why they acquired Sonnen, yeah, because Sonnen is a big startup with maybe more than 70 or 80 million in revenues. They raised, I think, almost 150 million euros in venture capital, and they got acquired for an undisclosed amount of money, but probably, I would say, at least half a unicorn. But this is definitely only a personal assumption because it wasn't disclosed. Yeah, but most people agree this is a very important acquisition, or from the investor's point of view, a very important exit. And it means that some investors made some money. They can return it to their fund investors. They can hopefully reinvest a lot of it. The founders got richer than they have been before, and maybe start investing as angels in the future. So I think these exits are really important for the market. And actually, Europe has been waiting quite a bit for more big exits. So this event, this liquidity event, the trade sale of Sonnen to Shell is really standing out, and it's really motivating everybody in the industry, and it's really proving that in our industry, wealth is being created. Yeah, value is being created, and new business models can be implemented successfully, and startups can grow from zero, because Sonnen was actually founded in the year 2010.
Yeah.
And they got acquired. At least the acquisition was announced in early in February 2019. Yeah, so I think it's basically almost the same lifetime as Ecosummit. So it's basically a 10-year startup lifetime in the case of Sonnen, which is it's not too long, it's not too short, and I think they really created a big company that many other players are watching. Yeah, and of course, you more than many other people know how important energy storage is for the future of the new energy system. And Sonnen clearly inspired a lot of other companies, startup companies on the one hand, and then corporates on the other hand, also to start energy storage businesses for consumers or as a target group.
Yeah. It's been interesting. I saw Christoph pitching at Ecosummit a number of times, and when I first got involved with them, I think there were still maybe 40, 50 people, and just the office in Bavaria. And the last 2 or 3 years have seen a rapid growth. But I think it's interesting. You're right. There've been a lot of, I won't say me too, because there are some very good products out there. But since the last 4 or 5 years, there've been a number of other companies who have launched a residential storage product or solution. I think the other interesting point you made there, actually, because at last year's summit, I bumped into 2 or 3 people who had done exactly as you say. They'd exited from a business, taken some time out, and then have started up on as angel investors on whatever scale they have, whether that's hundreds of thousands or maybe a few millions. But it's again good to see that the Cleantech community is obviously reaping the rewards, but more importantly, sharing it back into the system.
Yeah, and I think if you make money in your life, you can make a decision where to invest it in the future. And if you build your career on creating a business model and building a new company growing it in the right space, in the field of sustainability, or in particular in the field of renewable energy or electric mobility, I think you are very motivated to support the next generation of founders as one of the early investors. So I think this recycling of capital that is getting invested back into the next generation of startups is really something that is very important for every startup ecosystem in every country and in every industry.
Sure, yeah, and it's good to be a part of that and to see that in action. I think one of the other changes you sort of talked about the importance of energy storage, and absolutely correctly, because that again has driven the mobility revolution in terms of battery development and technologies. And in my time, I've seen things move from solar and wind being the dominant factors into energy storage, and now of course e-mobility is a big is a hugely fast growing area of tech. But I've also seen over that time very much the digitization of and moving towards sort of energy as a service and mobility as a service. And last year there were a number of startups pitching at Ecosummit with that as a background. Is that something you've seen, or is that something you've particularly targeted people with that profile, or is that just the way things are going?
I think digitalization is a key trend, and we have a lot of startups coming to the event that are building smart energy platforms. And there are a couple of success stories. For example, a Munich-based company called Greencom Networks just announced a new financing round led by Centrica, the big UK utility. And while the amount, again, was undisclosed, I understand it was a pretty good funding round, maybe around 10 million plus minus. I think it was a Series B round. And it so happens that Greencom Networks and Centrica had a first discussion at the Ecosummit London 2017. And only 1.5 years later, after Greencom Networks made more progress, and Centrica also realized that they should be getting more active as an investor, as a corporate VC, this investment, this transaction became possible. But I think it's another good example of the Ecosummit track record. In this case, a really powerful internet energy IoT platform. I think Greencom Networks is a European competitor of the American startup called AutoGrid. And Greencom Networks is basically on the right path now, and it is another almost classic investment where a corporate VC, a utility is becoming a customer on the one hand, but also because they foresee becoming an important customer, they want to participate in the upside, and they also decide to already invest while becoming a customer is taking place at the same time.
Yeah. I think in terms of startups generally, I had the conversation last week with Christopher Anuga, who obviously know from EVBox, and suggesting that certainly if there is a hardware element to your solution, it's very difficult now to be a startup without some very deep pockets or deep investments. But clearly, from a digital perspective, that's not necessarily the case. But for people who are looking to start up or to scale up and go into fundraising, Ecosummit aside, I mean, what are some of the general principles or some of the ideas that you would suggest to startups to be aware of before they start fundraising?
So I think every investor is looking first at the quality of the founders and the team of the startup. So I think any startup team, ideally more than one people, let's say 2 or maybe 3, they have to be smart, they should have some experience, they should have complementary skill sets, and they should really be recruited already by the maybe original guy or the original founder with the idea in a professional way. So I think the quality and the track record and the ability and the vision of the founders team is the most important investment criteria for any VC. And if there is still a gap in the founder team, then why not start filling this gap as quickly as possible? Yeah. Then I think every startup should be planning multiple financing rounds almost every year, latest every 2 years, and never try to sell off too much shares too early at a too low valuation. Yeah, I think that is very important, that companies are calculating their runway with existing capital in the bank. Yeah, meaning how far do I get with the money that I have? How far do I get with my product development, with my market and customer development, with my recruiting? How much capital do I really need to reach the next valuation driving milestone for my startup company? Yeah, and I think in a 12-year rhythm, planning with a 12-year rhythm is something that any startup should be doing. Yeah. Then, of course, many investors, they want to see revenues and product market fit, as I mentioned before. And some investors, like an early stage fund, Hightech Gründerfonds in Germany, for example, comes to my mind, or angel investors. Sometimes they like to invest pre-revenue, but then they want to exactly understand what is the USP of the company, why is the technology really, really strong? Is there even a patent or something comparable that provides a competitive advantage? Yeah, and then the amount of time, the time to market, the time to revenue has to be small in order to get people excited, to get investors excited. Yeah, and I think another very important rule for every good financing round is you should always have many term sheets and really have many investors interested, and do not close a transaction and make a deal with the first one that showed interest, or with only one investor that is showing interest. Yeah, because if you look at the companies, the startups who make it, they are growing their investor syndicate, basically the total group of shareholders, with every new financing round. Yeah, adding new networks to the equation, adding new geographies and new skill sets, and maybe new customer bases to the investor syndicate and into the cap table of the startup company.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Actually, there's a few things that come from that. One of which, as you said, about many term sheets. I think investing, or I should say, taking the money from one person, perhaps just or one institution, takes away, as you say, the ability to broaden your network. But also that element of too much too soon. It can be tempting, I know, to sort of have a big lump of money on the table, but for what cost? And sometimes perhaps it's better to take a smaller amount early on, and with a view of further fundraising, rather than taking a big number on the table and losing too much too soon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it is possible to see whether a founder, an entrepreneur, is raising money for the first time, and whether they made their homework or not. Yeah, I think you can read books nowadays like Venture Deals. You can talk to other founders who raised money. You can identify these successful companies by looking at the portfolio of active financial and corporate VCs. So basically, every founder has got a lot of options and opportunities to make homework and to learn how fundraising should be done, and what other people did in order to successfully fundraise. Yeah. And I think any investor can smell and understand quickly if there's a founder approaching them that has done their homework and that really know what they're going to do. For example, I often hear from a startup, even nowadays in the year 2019, oh, you know what, this is going to be our last financing round because we are going to reach break even, and then everything will be fine. You know, and in reality, every startup that is growing, they always make a trade-off between growth, and the investment in growth versus profit. And most of the startups that are ambitious and they want to grow fast, they have to invest all the money that they can raise into growing faster and not into reaching profitability or even break even. Yeah. Because why? I mean, why do you need to grow fast? And I think the main answer is there is a lot of competition. Even if you are a first mover and you may have identified a new market opportunity, even a blue ocean market, yeah, where initially there's maybe only one company.
Yep.
As soon as you find a few customers and other people learn about it, they start looking at what you're doing and they start copying you.
Yeah, certainly aware of that.
And companies nowadays need to outperform competition, by having deep pockets and by raising basically a lot of capital. And in some cases, if you look at the micro-mobility market at the moment, there is a couple of European startup companies that are really raising a lot of money already in their seed round or Series A round in order to grab market before the big players from the US and Asia are doing it.
Yeah.
And these companies, they are rolling out almost with a blitz rollout, into many markets where it is legally already possible. Other markets, it's not yet possible. And so they have to wait until they get a permission to offer this kind of new micro-mobility e-scooter or kick e-scooter sharing service, to be more precise. But it's really a competition among companies that are doing exactly the same, because they are all copycats of the original idea developers and of the first movers over there in the United States, but they do it as quickly as they can, and it's definitely a function to a large extent of the amount of capital that they raised, and these companies from the beginning going into a red ocean market, or quite soon to be a red ocean market, where some startups are going to die and some startups are going to survive.
It's that kind of land grab thing.
Among the ones surviving and the winners.
Yeah, as you say, I think some markets are like that. There's a land grab, and the important costs and the fundraising is around breaking territory and getting scale before your competition can do so. I'm conscious a little of time. There's a few things I'd like to discuss. We're obviously around the venture fund itself, but it was interesting you touched in the last comments around people, which of course from myself and from my Hyperion is a factor of why we're engaged in trying to make sure startups have the best management team, either pre-investment to enable the investment or post-investment to scale. But last year, your first slide mentioned people at the Ecosummit around one of the four great principles of to be required. So people is important. You also touched on there in terms of founders and pitching. Having attended many events, sometimes the founder is the best source to promote the company, but often some of the founders I've seen have not been perhaps very articulate or very skilled at presenting. I mean, what are your thoughts on how important the founder is to be the figurehead versus having somebody perhaps to come in to share the vision of the founder?
So I think there are two types of startups. One is a founder-led startup, where the founder, one of the founders, is basically evolving into a strong and always learning CEO. If you look at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, this is one of the examples. In the case of Christoph Ostermann and Sonnen, that's another great example. It's basically Christoph Ostermann. He is one of the two founders. He's the business guy. The other guy, Thorsten Stiefenhofer, is the technical guy, which is often already the perfect combination. And in most of the cases, the business guy is a great salesperson. Because I think Josef Brunner, the serial entrepreneur and CEO of Relayer, that also got sold to Munich Re for 300 million a couple of months ago. This guy, Josef Brunner, said at one of my events, there are two types of people in a company, one group is making the product and the other group is selling the product. And every startup wants to be successful needs both types of people. Yeah. And I think the ones that are raising the capital, the ones that are selling the product, are super important. And in an ideal world, the founder who goes on remains the CEO and is himself a great salesperson. Yeah. In some cases, the CTO or the original CTO is developing a great business skill just by repeatedly pitching and selling and getting better all the time and learning about the financials and so on. Yeah. So even if you start from a technical background, you can develop as an individual, yeah, as a founder into a great business leader. And having this original technical background, yeah, and then adding the business skill set to it, this is actually even the perfect combination. Yeah. Because then you have this dual track record and dual skill set, and you also have a deep understanding of the product, of the underlying technology, but you also learned your lessons and the things that you need in order to run a company and to grow a company. And definitely, a successful startup CEO has to become a great recruiter, yeah, because every good CEO quickly understands, okay, we need a lot of great people in the company. How do we get them? And how are we basically designing and optimizing our recruiting process, and then also the team development processes in place.
Critical to success, and not just because of the other hats that we wear. Again, I'd like to just quickly have a minute or two on the venture fund, which you in turn are now sort of about to launch yourself, in terms of how that's come about and what state that's at the moment.
Yeah, so this is a new project we are working on, because 10 years Ecosummit is actually the lifetime of a fund, of a VC fund. And the first 10 years of Ecosummit, I didn't have a VC fund to invest from, but now the goal is I want to raise a fund in order for the next 10 years to not only be an event organizer, but also an active investor. And I not only want to invest my own money, but also other people's money. So I'm actually raising a new independent financial VC fund right now. And we started with a fundraising half a year ago, basically last year in May. We announced that we wanted to do it. Then a couple of months later, we actually started doing it. And now, half a year later, we are still doing it, and we have learned a couple of things and a couple of requirements from the fund investors regarding us, regarding our team, our fund management team, and our investment strategy. Yeah. So in total, and as of today, we continue with the project of raising this fund. We have not yet reached a first closing, which means we cannot make yet investments out of the new fund, but we are planning to reach the first closing as soon as possible after Ecosummit Berlin, yeah, which takes place in May, on the 15th and 16th of May. And hopefully a few months later, we will reach a first closing. And we also decided to start with a smaller fund, maybe in the range of 10 million euro at a first closing. Maybe it can then double to 20 million until the final closing. Usually it takes 12 months to go from the first closing to the final closing. Yeah. But we definitely have what I call itchy investor feet, yeah? Meaning we really want to invest as quickly as possible, as soon as possible. And therefore we need the fund. And from what we learned from the past, it will be a good idea to start with a smaller fund, invest smaller tickets in seed rounds and A rounds, yeah, and build a portfolio of promising companies. Some of them have already pitched at Ecosummit in the past. Some of them are maybe pitching this year or next year. Yeah. And we are basically building at the moment, as we speak, our target portfolio, and we are analyzing startups, and we are learning which ones are the best investment cases, meaning they have a really good growth potential, and we definitely should be part of it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing more of that at Ecosummit, and as that evolves and comes through to closing. To close today's podcast, I always tend to ask around if there are any either books, podcasts, reading materials, or thought leaders that have been had the most impact on you personally in the last couple of years.
Oh, it's a good question, and I think I mentioned a book already, which is important for founders who want to raise money. It's called Venture Deals by Brett Feld and Jason Mendelsohn. I think that's almost a Bible for everybody who wants to, to build a big startup company and to get smart at raising successful financing rounds, because this book is actually explaining in every detail the content of a term sheet and how you can change the content of a term sheet if you don't like it by being able to negotiate it. Yeah, to negotiate the content of the term sheet, and you can only negotiate if you have more than one term sheet on the table. So I think without further ado, I would just repeat this book recommendation for Venture Deals.
Super. Okay. Well, we'll put a link to that from the episode page on the website. Thanks very much, Jan, for your time this morning. We could, of course, talk forever. It's such a great topic and great market to be active in. We look forward to seeing you for coffees and beers in Berlin in the near future. But for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you, David. You are doing great work at Hyperion, and now with a new podcast. I'm very happy and very proud to be part of it. Thank you very much for interviewing me.
Cool. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you for joining us again on the This Week in Cleantech podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if so, please do share it with friends, colleagues, and across any social media platforms, as it really does help widen our network. But until next time, goodbye.